What's up everyone and welcome back to another episode of The Playthrough, coming to you live from my very dimly lit apartment. But it kind of goes with the theme, Resident Evil playthrough. Today we're going to be talking about my experience with Resident Evil 4, which coming into the whole playthrough, I remember Resident Evil 4 being my favorite game of the series, and we'll see if that holds up by the end of this video. I've only played through Resident Evil 4 once, and I did it when it initially came out on the GameCube years and years ago in like 2005, I believe. So let's just take an overall look of the game first. Resident Evil 4 came out on January 11th, 2005 for the GameCube. About 6 months later, it was ported onto the PlayStation 2, and since then it has been ported onto many other systems. I played it on the Switch, as I am playing most of my games on the Switch just because I can play them on the go when I'm traveling, when I'm not at home, to just get me through this long game series franchise, and we're about halfway there with Resident Evil 4. It was directed and written by Shinji Mikami, and when this game came out, it was groundbreaking. It completely set the bar for new games, not just survival horror, but just video games in general, especially those third-person shooter games, and we'll talk about that a little bit when I get into the gameplay. But Resident Evil 4 is widely regarded as one of, if not the best game in the series, so we'll see how it stacks up against the other games that I have been playing, 0 through Code Veronica. But what's a game without the storyline? So let's get into the Resident Evil story. As per Wikipedia, U.S. government agent Leon S. Kennedy is on a mission to rescue Ashley Graham, the U.S. president's daughter, who has been kidnapped by a mysterious cult. He travels to a nameless rural village in Spain, where he encounters a group of hostile villagers who pledge their lives to the Los Illuminados, the cult that kidnapped Ashley. The villagers were once simple farmers until becoming infected by a mind-controlling parasite known as Las Plagas. While in the village, Leon is captured by its chief, Vitoris Menendez, and injected with Las Plagas. He finds himself held captive with Luis Serra, a former Los Illuminados researcher. The two work together to escape, but soon go their separate ways. Leon finds out Ashley is being held in a church and rescues her. They both escape from the church after Osmond Sadler, leader of Los Illuminados, reveals his plan to use the plaga they injected into Ashley to manipulate her into injecting the President of the United States with a sample once she returns home, allowing Sadler to begin his conquest of the world. After killing Menendez, Leon and Ashley tried to take refuge in a castle, but are attacked by more Illuminados under the command of Ramon Salazar, another of Sadler's henchmen who owns the castle, and the two become separated by Salazar's traps. Meanwhile, Luis searches for pills that will slow Leon and Ashley's infection, as well as the sample of Las Plagas. He brings the two items to Leon, but is killed by Sadler, who takes the sample, while the pills to suppress the infection remain in Leon's hands. While in the castle, Leon briefly encounters Ada Wong, a woman from his past who supports him during his mission. He battles his way through the castle before killing Salazar. Afterward, Leon travels to a nearby island research facility, where he continues the search for Ashley. He discovers that one of his former training comrades, Jack Krauser, who is believed to have been killed in a helicopter crash 2 years prior, is responsible for her kidnapping. Ada and Krauser are working with Albert Wesker, for whom both intend to secure a Plagas sample. Suspicious of the mercenaries' intentions, Sadler orders Krauser to kill Leon, believing that no matter which one dies, he will benefit. After Krauser's fatal defeat, Leon rescues Ashley and they remove the Plagas from their bodies using a specialized radiotherapeutic device. Leon confronts Sadler and with Ada's help manages to kill him. However, Ada takes the sample from Leon at gunpoint before escaping in a helicopter, leaving Leon and Ashley to escape via her jet ski as the island explodes. So there you have it, the story for Resident Evil 4. So I must applaud them for not doing the same thing they've been doing for the past 4 games. You know, the whole zombies, Umbrella has a very minimal presence in this game. They went with a completely different story for a completely different game. It was really the next chapter in Resident Evil. And yes, you could say that they just kind of swapped the zombies out for the Las Plagas infected, but the AI is smarter, which makes the villains smarter, and it's just a completely different story from what we've been told before. We're also starting to see this time in video games was a huge shift, and we're starting to see better voice acting from the actors, better direction from the cinematics and the story and everything. When you compare this to the original Resident Evil 1, Resident Evil 2, 3 Code Veronica, the voice acting stands out much more. It's not there yet to where we are today, but it was during that time that we definitely see everything start to shifting into more of this like cinematic and this being more of an actual art form to tell a story rather than just playing the game. I must say, the score was pretty great in this game too. The score and the music, it kept me on the edge of my seat most of the time. And I don't know if that would fall under gameplay or story, but I'm putting it right here. But yeah, good job on that. The game has this whole race against time dynamic that makes you want to keep moving and keep going forward to uncover what's going to happen next in the story. And it's one of those games that make you just want to play more and more. So at this point in the Resident Evil storyline, not counting Resident Evil 0, we really have 3 story arcs, right? With each of its main protagonists getting 2 games. So we have Jill Valentine, whose story began in Resident Evil 1 and continued in Resident Evil 3. We have the Redfields, Chris and Claire. Chris's story began in Resident Evil 1, continued in Code Veronica. Claire's began in Resident Evil 2, continued in Code Veronica. And then we have Leon's, which began in Resident Evil 2, continued in Resident Evil 4. So we can actually start seeing the universe branching off and being built more from just like these simple games that came out in the 90s. They turn the page on the old games, they're moving forward into the next generation, and they're giving us something completely different than what we've seen before. When I came into the game initially, yes, it felt a little weird because it was they were still figuring out the controls, right? They're still figuring out the controls for third-person shooters, third-person action shooters. I'm very glad they went away from their fixed camera point of view because that's starting to get stale, especially at this time, and that's why they decided to move forward with this new over-the-shoulder type of camera. But you can't control the camera fully, you can't strafe, you can't aim and move. It's once you enter the aim, you have to, you're stationary. So it's still a little weird, and it's a little weird with the movement. And I died like in the village a few times the first time when I went in there. But once you get the hang of it, everything's fine. And it just takes a little bit. It's a little bit of a learning curve, of a relearning curve for an old game that you have to come back to. So like, I really don't hold any of that against the game. I think people don't realize what this game did for other games. If you're younger and you weren't alive or don't remember when Resident Evil 4 came out, this game was so groundbreaking at the time it came out. I remember watching the E3 trailer and being blown away by how good this game looked. And then it came out, and just the things that it did for the time, every game does now. So many games have copied what Resident Evil 4 did. And at the time, it was new and it was refreshing, and you can easily see how the gameplay just changed the landscape of video games. I mean, quick time events were still kind of new at that point. And yes, they're a little repetitive now when going back and playing Resident Evil 4, but at the time, that was something where it's like you're just walking along and it's like, push these buttons or you die. You do see the use of environments, you know, shoot the barrels, shoot something that knocks the rock down to crush El Gigante. It wasn't anything that we haven't seen before, but I do like that they incorporated that in Resident Evil 4. The merchant with the upgrade and the shop is a great addition. It doesn't really make that much sense to the story that this guy would just be hanging out selling Leon some guns. It gives you the ability to start to customize your weapons and customize your character. What are you gonna choose? What are you gonna buy? What are you buying? Plus, the merchant's voice is fantastic.
Got something that might interest you.
I can't tell, is he like Scottish or what? Amazing boss battles. Amazing boss battles. I mean, there are so many, and they're all different. And they're none of the, well, all right, they're not all different. You fight El Gigante like 4 times, but there are still so many, and they're unique. And this is how you do boss battles, and I think that's one of the things that made this game so good. How do you kill this guy? You have to knock over this canister and freeze him. You can't kill this guy, you just have to run away from him, and then you get to fight him later. It makes you think. It's, you know, looking out for their patterns, which they did extremely well. And there were so many boss fights that I completely forgot about until I replayed the game, like Del Lago, the giant fish parasite thing. Completely forgot about that until I played and was like, oh yeah, I remember this. The puzzles in this game were not bad. They weren't fantastic. They weren't like as good as the boss battles were, but they weren't bad and they were fun. And I think that we had a decent puzzle system in this game. We didn't get as much puzzles as the previous games, I feel like, you know, Resident Evil 1 and 2. But I think for what it lacks in puzzles, it makes up in other spots in the game. And I think what really drives this game home and what really makes this game great is that it's constantly changing. You're constantly fighting new enemies, you're fighting new bosses, your strategy has to change, your guns are changing. Sometimes you might be like on an on-rails minecart, or you might be in the boat fighting Del Lago, and the way the enemies interact with you is changing. Sometimes you might have Ashley to have to look after also, which changes your whole dynamic and your whole strategy of how you're doing it. So it never feels repetitive. Throughout the entire 20 hours that I played this game, it did not feel repetitive at all, and I think that is huge for games, and especially an older game like this. So there's my thoughts on Resident Evil 4. Does it still hold up today? Abso-fucking-lutely. I thought it was great. I had a fantastic time playing it. I loved replaying this. I also did play Separate Ways, the Ada Wong expansion that came out with the PS2. This is the first time I ever played it. And I think this was great because it's kind of like an homage to the old Resident Evil games where it's like part B, where you play through the story and then you play through the other part of the story. It filled in the gaps and explained a lot of stuff that I was unaware of at the time. That was a cool little addition as well, and it was only a few hours. You know, I think I beat it in 2 days, playing a couple hours a day. So that was fun too. And this game is just so good. It's still so good. I can't believe 15 years later, this game is still that good. That is a testament, and I have to put it at 1. I'm gonna rank it, and I have to rank it at number 1. I had more fun playing this than I did the Resident Evil 2 remake. I know, sue me. I just think it did so much for games, and it was such a blast to play still. It's gonna be hard to see how the Resident Evil 4 remake stacks up against this, because it's so good, and I don't really know if it needs a remake. I guess the remake could be pretty great, but we'll see when it comes out in a few years. So unit ranking of the Resident Evil franchise, up from 0 to 4, we have at the top, number 1, Resident Evil 4, number 2, Resident Evil 2 Remake, number 3, Resident Evil Code Veronica, number 4, Resident Evil 3 Remake, number 5, Resident Evil 1, and number 6, Resident Evil 0. So of the next few games that I'm going to be playing, I have only played one of them, and that is Resident Evil 5. And I remember, same thing with Resident Evil 4, I played it once, it was years ago on Xbox 360, and I remember liking it, but not loving it, and it being kind of just like Resident Evil 4 Plus, but not as good. So we'll see what my thoughts are on that. But that's not what I'm going to be playing next. What I'm going to be playing next is Resident Evil Revelations number 1. I've never played it. After that, we'll hit 5, Revelations 2, 6, and 7. And then by that point, 8 might be out, so maybe 8 too. So please stay tuned for my continuous playthrough of Resident Evil. The Resident Evil playthrough rolls on. If you like watching me play through franchises and ranking them, then please head over to my channel, like, subscribe, click that big old bell button so you get notifications every time I post a new video, and hopefully I'll see you next time.